This is the Elta Music Big Ambient Machine Solar-50. I'm not sure whether it's called the Big Ambient Machine or the Solar-50, but I do know it's made by Elta Music. Elta Music are a Russian company, and this thing is quite an anomaly. It's quite an unusual thing. And looking at it here, it's got covered in knobs. And it's actually got 50 oscillators. There are 50 oscillators on this, split across 10 voices. Each oscillator is manually tuned, sawtooth, no other waves available, a couple of LFOs, an envelope trigger, gate trigger, and a 10-way touch keyboard. Each one of these corresponds to the voices 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a contact mic, and there are these little trigger points here which output sort of gate via these two outputs here. It's very unusual. You might think, oh, it's like a Lyra 50, a Lyra 8 rather, and yeah, kind of, in that it's Eastern European / Russian / Ukrainian, and they're both drones. And they both require manual tuning and have unusual inputs. But that's kind of where the similarity ends, because this is very different in a lot of ways as well. It's not quite the same thing. A little bit more on the front panel. Each oscillator has 5 tuning knobs and an activation switch. When you switch them on, the lights go on and off in this little indicator, which is actually really handy to see. There's also a little mod button, which enables an oscillator for modulation via the CV, and also this rather unusual optical sensor. There's an effects generator in as well, which comes with all of these cartridges, which are kind of pretty cool, actually. They've all got different algorithms. It's mono, though, rather sadly. There's also a 2-pole resonant filter, which we believe is modelled on the Polyvox style filter. It's a bit of a beast, and the reason I'm hesitating here is because I'm not quite sure how to present this, because while you've got masses and masses of oscillators, the thing about having masses and masses of oscillators is it can sound like a real mess, and it all has to be tuned manually. There's no presets involved on this apart from on the effects, which each effect has a 3-position switch for a cartridge effect selector. I suppose the easiest way for me to show you what it can do is to play something. I'll press play on my Beat Step, because the Beat Step, what I've got here is the Beat Step Pro is triggering these voices here, these 5 voices out of the trigger outputs via these cables. We can trigger them so they won't be triggered via this keyboard anymore. There's nothing going on with that. So if I press play, I'm going to be triggering chords from these steps. And now I can play notes on top. What I'm also doing is using this trigger, which is the contact mic here, to trigger this envelope, which is affecting the filters. Also had the effects set up to this sort of infinite kind of capture, or well, it's like an infinite reverb. So quite interesting, but even then you can hear there's some wonky tuning. It's actually, this is the one thing that I'm going to say right up front, it's actually really hard. If you want to use it with other tuned stuff, it's really quite hard to get absolutely spot on. And that's something that I'm finding quite frustrating, because every time I get an example, I'll walk away, maybe check an email or the phone rings or something, I come back and it's just ever so slightly kind of shifted, and that is proving to be quite frustrating for stuff that I'm trying to create, which is sort of tuned. For other stuff, not so much of an issue. Okay, so let's get stuck into a single voice. This is a single voice module. There are 10, they're all identical. There's no difference between any of them. And first thing to notice is I'm going to trigger this from the keypad, which you can see here. And you can hear that there is actually a bit of bleed and a bit of noise going on. That's just with all the voices switched off. So let's switch a voice on. You can hear we tune it manually with one of these little knobs, which are sort of interesting little caps. It's quite... Let's try that. I don't know, that's probably over an octave on each one, and each one of these has a slightly different range. And you tune them all manually. It's really quite simple. So that sounds pretty good. We also have basic envelope controls here, which are attack, sustain, release. We can also just press hold, which will basically switch the whole thing on. There's a gate input, which you can take and trigger the voice, as I was doing a little earlier. And there's also envelope attack out and release phase out, which are quite useful for some things. There's a CV mod. So now if we just go back to, let's just have one voice here. And you hear it is a little bit on the noisy side, and put a bit of release on, we don't get any of that DC. Then what we're going to do is add the we can modulate. We press the modulation in, and there's this photo sensitivity, which is quite basic, shall we say. You know, we can stick something else in here. Let's put a if we stick one of these cables in here, let's go an LFO out and go into the pitch mod. It's not particularly extreme in terms of the amount of modulation. It looks very pretty, doesn't it, when you do that? I would really like to have seen CV volt per octave control in here, but I guess getting the scaling right across all of those octaves would have just been probably too much circuitry for what's going on in here. So it's of limited use, because you'll notice I push that in. When I push the mods in, the pitch changes. And I think we got depth going this way, and it's not unipolar, and it's not monopolar, and it's not bipolar. I don't really know. A little bit funky. And now this knob has a sort of pitch offset. And I noticed that when it's far over to the left, you can get some useful notes out of it. But when you turn it right down, that's the highest that the lowest oscillator will go. So it's some interesting kind of choices going on here. When we turn it past 12 o'clock, what actually happens is they will self-oscillate. These two will modulate each other. So you can get some sort of interesting extra tones in there, but not that interesting. You know, the relationship between those when they intermodulate is quite unpredictable as well. So we're dealing with something that feels a little bit noisy, is a little bit unusual in the way it responds to modulation signals. The real trick seems to be getting the thing tuned up into a note, and then maybe bringing in the effects. And filtering it. Whoa! This filter is actually quite interesting. If we go down to a lower note, it's quite a nice sounding and resonant filter. Got some lovely harmonics there. Very nice. So a little bit more on how the overall voice architecture works. Basically, there's a voice mixer across here which gives you 10 inputs, so you can match the levels of each individual voice. Then there's a main mixer for left and right, so voices 1 to 5 and voices 6 to 10. There's an external audio input, which in this case, I was just taking the trigger output of the BeatStep Pro and just giving myself a click input. But I could just as easily have an external audio level coming in, comes into the mixer, then goes via the filter and then the effects as well. Just another useful path. Additionally, we've got the piezo mic as well, which if we wanted to bring that in, that gives us the gain there, but we can take an external input here from the mic/guitar, switch it to external input, and then we can drive that quite hard. In fact, I did a Friday Fun with that and I was distorting the signal here. But another trick that you can do with that is you can use it to trigger the envelope. Let's turn that down. And then you get a gate out and also an envelope out, which you could use for modulation or modulating the filter if that's what you wanted. Now the actual routing is kind of quite funky because there's a mono wet output, which we can see here, which is a mix of all the voices. But if we plugged, we've got dry outputs for the left voices and the right voices. And if I take the output of here, that would be the left-hand bank of voices, and that would come out dry, leaving only the right-hand voices to go in via the effects. So you've got a little bit of routing possibility there, and so you could send some voices out to different effects or extract them, you know, treat them differently than the main thing, and they won't be filtered and they won't have any of that stuff going on. So there's one little trick I discovered that's kind of cool. If you take the output of one of the sides and then you go into the mic or guitar and then drive, you can get a lot of extra drive and sort of use this little preamp to drive it. So how does it sound if we tune all those oscillators up? So I've tuned all of these oscillators to octaves or unisons, so we should have a nice fat sound here. And you can see quite a nice frequency range. Sounds fine. And in fact, if we were to, this is where something would be really, if this was actually some sort of volt per octave, maybe just on this control, then we could have, we could tune the entire oscillator and play maybe over a limited space. It would be kind of cool if it did that. There's one thing I noticed, if I tune this oscillator up, if I've got this pitch knob in anything other than far left, I get modulation of that pitch as well, so it's quite unpredictable in many ways. But let's just try and tune. So we got, so now we've got these two oscillators. So it's possible to do sort of pitch stuff and we could sequence that, but If you're trying to create a bigger spread and have like fifths or thirds or other interesting tunings, it's just that slight variance just feels just a little bit too much to reliably create these sort of nice chords. But I mean, as you can see, there's plenty of low end in there. I mean, yeah, it would be nice if we had maybe you know, a couple of voices out of each group of 5 would just had a different waveform, so we could have like a sine voice or, you know, a square voice as opposed to all triangles, because then we'd have a bit more tonal variation. We've also got a pair of LFOs, LFO A and B, exactly the same. They have a variable waveform from triangle through square, go into kind of semi-audio rates, and that's as slow as they go. Weirdly, they don't go any slower than that. It would be nice to actually have a little bit more range in the lower end, because I would like often to be able to be using, you know, a slow mod, or certainly slower than this goes, but perfectly usable, no sync or anything like that, just free running. Okay, so I've got this kind of more complex patch running here, which is using some external modulation sources from the Pittsburgh modular, which I've got here, which is a sort of rhythmic dual LFO modulation. Plus I've got, I'm using the Cathedral cartridge in here, which gives us I'm using, what else? The shimmer, the shimmer one, which again is a real shame this is not stereo, because having access to these effects in a stereo format just by, we could access it by using the external input, would make this actually more useful, because we could use it as a stereo effects device. We can use it as a mono effects, but it was just a shame it's not. So I'm running chords on this side. And mono on this side. Again, that was in tune a minute ago, and it's not in tune now, which is just a little bit, it kind of highlights the fact that this does tend to kind of move and breathe, which is great because analog is lovely, but it's also a little bit frustrating when you're trying to set up these big multi-oscillator chord pitched type effects. So anyway, back to this guy. So the other thing that I'm doing here is I'm running a modulation source from the LFO in Pittsburgh, and I could just punch it in, which is kind of useful. But I could also plug this into maybe an effects. Take the depth down. Interesting. I mean, you can create some interesting things. Let's try another effect in here. I've got, let's see, let's try Infinity. This is a similar, it's kind of a reverb type effect. I'll unplug that, because all you have to do is you can hot swap these and you can plug them in. Incidentally, these are, you can get a kit to program these. It's got a little EEPROM switch, maybe if I slightly closer, and you can plug these in and program them from an additional kit. Just while we're on the subject of this, you get 3 cartridges with the base model. and then you can buy more. This has got the full 12, although I haven't got the kit. The kit also, you require a bit of software. I think it runs on PC only, and if you're a DSP coder, you can program your own kind of stuff, which would be pretty cool. So let's see what this one does. This is infinity. And I'm modulating. Some interesting. Oh, that's quite cool. Yeah, this actually introduces the fact, I mean, these effects are kind of fun. There are some really interesting ones, although they're a bit noisy. Again, like much of the stuff that's running on this, it's kind of a little bit dirty, a little bit grungy. You know, we've got the oscillator bleed, we've got the noise of the effects, and some of the sort of DC switching is a little bit kind of, well, on the envelopes. But ultimately, you know, you can create some very unique and interesting soundscapes here. I suppose the thing for me is it worth the amount of effort that you get? Because if it was much more tunable and repeatable pitch-wise, I know that goes against the sort of concept and the philosophy of this machine, but it would make this more immediately useful. I find that I'm kind of creating a patch, walking away, maybe I'll edit, you know, a previous section on this review, and I'll come back and it'll just be off a little bit, and that's quite frustrating. I mean, there's organic, which is cool, but then there's this sort of nature of this, it's just a little bit too organic to make it repeatable. Now, many of you will be perfectly happy with this, and that's fine. It's just, for me, I'm finding it a little bit frustrating when it comes to trying to create something repeatable for review purposes. I mean, I guess if you just kind of put the audio recorder on and just fill your boots, then you're going to have a lot of stuff to play with. But for repeatability, it is quite difficult. This guy costs about 1,050 euros as it comes. That's with 3 cartridges. There are various other price points as you add more cartridges. You can also get a nice case with it, and you can get the EEPROM programmer for the effects. So all in all, you can pay, you know, up to about 1,200–1,300 euros. But there is a pre-order scenario. It's not, they're not in full production, but it is a nice thing, which is quite interesting. It's just, I think for me, I probably wouldn't spend that much money on something because I don't think it would form the heart of something that I would do. Anyway, once again, please do support us on Patreon if you feel the need. This URL will scroll below, but that was the Elta Music Solar-50 Big Ambient Machine. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.